I think we're frightened to death. We don't talk about it enough. We don't see it as part of life. We don't want to talk about that.
Yeah,
let's put that in another room and lock it away.
You're listening to Parting. My name is Nikki and I'm your host for this episode.
And my name's Phil, and I'm Nikki's offsider.
First up, I would like to acknowledge that we are telling stories to you from the homelands of the Darawal, Ilauri and Wadi Wadi peoples. And we pay our respects to our elders and honour our ancestors.
That voice you heard at the top of the show was Steve Parsons, who was a funeral celebrant. He also used to be a radio DJ for many years in the Illawarra, which is why his voice sounds so good.
And so he was a great way to start our show.
Where we're going to talk about grief
and death and dying.
So in this podcast series, we're going to open the door of that locked room he talked about and have a bit of a look around.
The theme for today's episode is Not Afraid. And in it, we are going to give you a bunch of different kinds of stories that'll get us thinking about what death is.
And if we talk about it, we might find it makes it a little less scary. Let's see how we go. Today, we're going to share 3 stories with you.
Story 1, Dead Fish. Where TJ gets a fish, calls him Dead Fish, and, well, you can imagine what happens next.
Story 2, Minutes Away from Not Being Afraid, where we talk a bit more to Steve and a couple of other people who look after funerals.
Story 3, Meet the Funeral Director, where we do just that. We're a group of young people who happen to live in places that are considered disadvantaged.
So young people like Nikki often create fictional stories with us, the crew mentors, because it's a good way to explore stuff without it getting too personal and scary.
So a fictional story is what you are going to get first today. Story 1, Dead Fish.
TJ was never allowed to have pets.
TJ wasn't allowed to have pets.
His mum said he wasn't old enough to look after them and that she would just end up doing all the work.
Sometimes he would catch lizards and bugs and keep them in an empty Chinese container.
Sometimes he'd catch lizards or bugs from the garden and keep them in an empty Chinese food container with cling film on the top, some holes poked in for air, and twigs and leaves to make it feel a bit more like home.
He would fill bottle caps with water and feed them peanut butter from his sandwiches.
He'd fill a bottle cap with water and give them bits of peanut butter from his sandwiches to eat.
He didn't know what lizards ate.
Leaves?
Leaves?
Bugs?
Bugs?
Probably not peanut butter sandwiches.
Probably not peanut butter sandwiches. He never gave them names because they were never around for more than a few days.
His mum said it was cruel to keep them cooped up in a container.
What
if they have a family, TJ? That could be a mummy lizard who needs to get back to her babies. Have you ever thought of that?
Have you ever thought of that?
He had thought of that.
He also thought the lizards might actually like a break from being in the dangerous garden.
The dangerous garden.
In the box home, at least there wasn't any fear of getting trodden on or eaten by a bird. And there was always fresh water and peanut butter sandwiches.
All the same, he knew they couldn't stay, and if they had names, it would make it all the harder to say goodbye, even after only 3 days.
Even after only 3 days.
So they were all just called Lizard.
One morning, the day before TJ was to turn 7, his mum said he could have a goldfish for his birthday present.
After school, they would go down to the pet shop just to have a look, Mum said.
The pet shop had rows and rows of tanks and corridors all lit up blue,
with thousands of fish all dancing about in the water trying to get his attention.
Big fish and teeny tiny fish.
Boring brown fish and fish so colourful they look like they can glow in the dark.
TJ raced down the glittering aisles, dragging his mum from tank to tank and back again to catch the ones they might have missed from the first time round.
Now, we're just here to have a look, remember?
She said.
You need to wait until I get paid before we get a tank or anything.
But you said I could have one for my birthday. It's nearly my birthday. You don't get paid until next week, and I don't have anything for my birthday, Mum, and you said.
TJ's voice was getting louder. His words were catching in his throat. Tears were building in his eyes, and all around the pet shop heads were turning in their direction.
Warning! Please brace for imminent tantrum in T-minus 5, 4, 3, 2...
Can I help you?
The shop lady arrived just in time.
It's my birthday,
said TJ through his tears.
Oh, well, happy birthday to you then,
said the shop lady.
It's not really, said TJ's mum. It pretty much is, said TJ.
And how old are you turning?
I'll be 8,
said TJ. You have to get to 7 first, said Mum.
And are you looking at getting a fishy for your birthday, Prezi? Said the shop lady.
TJ gave the lady a sideways look.
This is not the way you should talk to an almost 8-year-old.
But he was willing to play along.
Yes, a fishy just like Nemo.
Mum took a deep breath.
You can have one of the $5 fish, okay?
Fair enough.
There was lots of $5 fish.
All crammed into 2 tanks that flash orange and gold in the light.
But TJ picked out a jet black fish with big googly eyes.
The shop lady stuck in her net and caught the fish against the edge of the tank, drawing it out of the water, where it flopped about in the net for a few seconds before landing in a plastic bag. Plop.
TJ raced back home.
Fast.
How long can fish survive in a plastic bag? He said.
He'll be fine, mate, but you probably shouldn't shake him around like that. Just slow down, said Mum.
As she tried to keep up.
Mum took out a clear kitchen dish from the cupboard under the sink and filled it with water.
TJ wanted to put him in straight away.
But Mum said they needed to sit the bag in there for a while so the fish could get used to the temperature of the water.
Apparently the shop lady told her that.
But TJ didn't remember that conversation.
He was too busy looking at his new pet, his new friend.
Dead fish, he called him. Well, not the first day. On the first day, he just called him Fish.
On the first day, he just called him Fish. You and I are going to be friends, Fish.
He told him.
And soon we'll get your new mansion fish tank and lots of new fish friends. Would you like that?
Nope, said Fish.
He always used to say that. TJ would dip his finger below the surface of the water.
And Fish would swim up and nibble on it.
It didn't hurt, it kind of tickled.
That's how you know that we're friends, TJ thought.
I think he's hungry, Mum.
You can't feed him again though, mate. If you feed him too much, he'll explode.
Really?
TJ imagined Fish getting bigger and bigger.
His stomach swelling, getting larger and rounder like someone inflating a giant black scaly balloon.
Soon he'd be too big for his
he'd be
kitchen
too big
dish.
for his kitchen dish, too big for the living room, too big for the house, and finally, bang!
Bits of fish and fish food everywhere. Better not risk it.
A day later, TJ woke up 7.
He felt taller, smarter, and ready to take on all the important things that people who are 7 get to do.
As my first act as a 7-year-old,
TJ thought to himself, I will take care of my new responsibility and give Fish his breakfast. Fish will be happy, Mum will be happy, and I will be 7.
And I'll be 7.
TJ picked up the plastic container of dried fish food from the counter, unscrewed the lid, and took out a very measured 2-finger pinch of multicoloured flakes and knelt down next to the kitchen dish on the coffee table. His hand hovered over the still surface of the water.
But he did not let go of the flakes.
TJ sat there on his knees for a while, staring at Fish, floating on top of the water.
TJ tried to push him back down to the bottom.
Maybe he just wasn't feeling well and needed a rest.
Maybe he forgot how to swim, and once he was right way up, he'd remember again.
But Fish didn't swim, or move, or go moop.
He just bobbed around slightly sideways in the water.
Mum walked down the stairs
and saw TJ sitting next to his fish. She saw the fish was floating upside down.
What happened to the fish? She asked.
I don't know, answered TJ. He was like this when I came down.
Mum knelt down beside him.
Is he dead? He asked her.
Mum ran her hand gently through TJ's hair.
I'm afraid so, buddy. I'm so sorry.
She picked up the kitchen dish and walked it towards the bathroom. Come on then. What are you doing? TJ exclaimed. We have to bury him. I think it might be better if we flush him, send him back to the ocean.
Mum turned away and continued on towards the bathroom.
TJ didn't like this idea. He only got Fish yesterday.
He didn't want to send him so far away.
Not yet. It didn't feel right.
No!
TJ stood up. We need to have a burial and a funeral.
Mum was already at the door to the bathroom.
She looked at TJ, then down at dead Fish, and let out a sigh.
TJ watched as Mum dug a little hole in the backyard.
They'd wrapped dead fish in some kitchen paper.
They wrapped dead fish in some kitchen paper.
He was still very wet and slimy.
TJ gently placed him in the hole.
Before Mum covered it over with dirt.
And Mum covered it over with dirt.
There was still a part of TJ that hoped that as he was placing the paper bundle into the hole, he'd feel a twitch or a flap from within.
He even stood there for a while staring at the dirt.
He even stood there for a while, eyeing down the freshly dug earth for any sign of movement, until Mum told him he had to go inside
and start getting ready for school.
I'm so sorry, mate,
said Mum.
But we should have really waited till we had a proper tank for him. We'll get you another fish.
That's okay,
said TJ.
I don't want another fish.
I don't want another fish.
TJ thought about dead fish all day.
He wanted to go home to check on him, to make sure he was still dead.
It's somebody in this room's birthday today,
said TJ's teacher.
Can we all wish TJ a very happy birthday?
Happy birthday, TJ!
Chorused the class.
The teacher asked TJ if he was having a good day.
And are you having a good day so far?
My fish is dead.
Oh, said the teacher, and the class looked shocked.
Oh, that's not a good way to start your birthday, is it? I'm so sorry you lost your fish, TJ.
I didn't lose him.
I didn't lose him.
Mum just buried him in the backyard.
Mum just buried him in the backyard, he said.
It was true. Dead fish was still there, right there in TJ's backyard.
Wrapped up in kitchen paper and covered in dirt.
He wasn't gone.
At least he didn't think so.
TJ had never known anyone or anything that had died before. He remembered his mum once leaving him with the next door neighbours to go to a funeral for an uncle in the family.
But TJ had never met him.
Or even known what he looked like.
He thought about the times he'd seen characters in movies die.
Most of the time they looked like they were sleeping.
And then you never saw them again.
Except if they came back as ghosts in the sky.
Hallelujah!
He stared out at the clouds, drifting past the classroom window.
Squinting his eyes and trying to will them into fish shapes.
He thought about the characters that dissolved into nothing when they died, leaving behind the crumpled blanket they'd been wrapped in, all their clothes.
Dead fish didn't have any clothes or blankets.
Unless you count kitchen paper.
He wondered all day about what was happening under the ground in his backyard.
When TJ arrived home in the afternoon, his mum was in the kitchen doing the washing up.
The kitchen dish was leaning on the side of the drying rack.
Hey birthday boy, she said. Did you have a good day? Did your friends wish you a happy birthday?
Yep, said TJ.
The whole class did, because Miss Sherman made them. Uh-huh, Mum said. But that's still nice though, right? There's some prezzies in the table there for you and a card from Nana and Pa. Sorry they're not wrapped, we didn't have any paper, but I didn't think you'd mind.
TJ didn't mind.
There was a pencil case of monsters printed all over it, and there was a packet of pencils. There were some socks with monsters on them. Even the card from Nana and Pa had a picture of a monster eating a number 7 on the front.
TJ didn't remember ever saying he was into monsters.
Maybe they were trying to tell him something.
But TJ didn't have time to think about that.
He made his way to the front door. Thanks, Mum, he called out.
Where are you going? She said.
Just out to play.
Okay, make sure you're home when the street lights come on. We're having spag bowl.
Spaghetti bolognese was TJ's favourite, but he didn't have time to think about that either.
He waited for the screen door to swing closed behind him and crept as silently as he could around the side of the house into the backyard.
He checked the windows of the back of the house to make sure his mum wasn't watching.
And made his way to the patch of freshly dug dirt that sat over the hole he'd placed dead fish in.
TJ pulled away the earth with his fingers until he saw the white paper.
Gently dusting off the last bits of clumped dirt, TJ could see the bulge underneath and at least knew one truth: dead fish hadn't disappeared. He hesitated for a moment, fingers pinched around a corner of kitchen paper.
Wanting to know, but perhaps not wanting to see.
TJ wasn't afraid of skeletons.
But then, he'd never actually seen a real one before.
He drew in the spring air slowly and pulled back Dead Fish's blanket.
Of all the things TJ had imagined throughout the day, this wasn't one of them. Dead fish, while almost certainly dead, looked very much the same as he had this morning.
A little less wet.
And a little more smelly. His huge pokey-out eyes had sunken in a bit, and there was this milky white glaze across them.
But they weren't closed, as if he was sleeping.
He hadn't been vaporized into nothing.
He wasn't a skeleton in a hole or a ghost in the clouds.
Or a ghost in the clouds.
Just a fish that happened to not be alive anymore. Just to be sure, though, TJ prodded dead fish in the eye with his index finger.
It was like touching a pea covered in butter.
This was a dead fish. TJ heard some talking coming back from the house. He quickly covered dead fish up back again and started pushing the dirt back in the hole, all the while glancing back at the house.
But no one came out.
No one had seen him.
TJ thought about dead fish all that night.
It started to make him feel a bit sad.
Thinking of dead fish covered in dirt in the ground, all alone, with no water.
Water. That was it.
Fish need water.
Perhaps I should water the ground, TJ thought, just to stop him from drying out completely.
He might like that.
The next morning, TJ took the plastic watering can from next to the back door and started filling it with water from the tap at the side of the house.
The plastic was old and hard and brittle.
And there was a big crack down one side of the watering can.
But it still worked if you didn't fill it up all the way.
He stood over Dead Fish's grave with the half-filled watering can poised to pour.
Then he changed his mind.
Glancing towards the house to make sure Mum wasn't watching, TJ quickly knelt down and began once again
to pull away the dirt what covered dead fish.
A fleshy pink worm wriggled through the dirt between TJ's fingers.
He pinched what he assumed was the worm's head and held it up to his face.
He's my friend, not your food,
TJ thundered.
And he flung the worm over the other side of the garden. There was a crashing noise from inside the house and made TJ jump.
And then freeze for a second. It's okay.
Mum was probably trying to get something out of the cupboard.
His heart was pounding.
He better be quick. But when he turned back to the hole,
TJ just sat, staring at the browning kitchen paper in the hole and at something very odd.
Dead fish somehow had gotten bigger.
Maybe he was wrong. Maybe the worm wasn't trying to eat dead fish after all.
Maybe the worm wasn't trying to eat dead fish after all.
Maybe it was dead fish eating worms.
Maybe it was dead fish that was eating worms.
And without TJ around to make sure he didn't eat too much, dead fish would become a ticking worm bomb.
Lifting the kitchen paper was a little bit trickier this time.
Part of it had become stuck to dead fish's swollen body.
TJ was trying to be careful.
But some of the fish scales had come away with the paper as he pulled.
Oh, sorry, buddy. TJ apologised.
Dead fish didn't seem to mind.
Or react at all.
Of course he didn't.
He was dead.
He couldn't feel, or eat worms, or care less about water.
Deep down, TJ felt like he knew these things.
But that just seemed to make him feel sad.
The smell was starting to get to him, so TJ began filling in Dead Fish's grave once again.
It was like the smell of gunk that comes out of the sink mixed with yesterday's prawn shells in the outside bin on a hot day. Just the thought of it made TJ's nose tickle.
His hands were covered in dirt, so he ran the inside of his forearm all along his face to catch the itch.
What are you doing?
Mum looked pretty angry as he walked inside.
Nothing, he said quickly.
Carefully trying to hide his dirt-covered hands behind his back.
What's behind your back? Show me your hands,
she said.
TJ didn't want to show her.
He knew he probably shouldn't dig up Dead Fish's grave, but he didn't think his mum would be this cranky about it. She was using the same voice she used when he rode his scooter too close to the big road, or the time he was about to pull the crumpet out of the toaster with a fork.
Out of the toaster with a fork?
He was in trouble.
I wasn't doing nothing, Mum, swear. It was worth a shot.
TJ's mum pulled one of his hands out from behind his back and examined the dark soil that covered up his fingers and palm and sat embedded under his fingernails.
Did you dig up the fish?
No,
TJ, I saw you.
But
That's disgusting.
I just wanted to...
Go and wash your hands before I puke.
TJ was pushed down the hall to the bathroom.
With soap and the brush. And for God's sakes, don't touch anything. It wasn't fair.
Dead fish was TJ's pet.
He'd looked after him.
He talked to him.
He fed him and he buried him.
He should be able to see what was happening to his friend under the ground.
He wanted to know.
Mum wouldn't let it go.
At dinner, she made him promise that he wouldn't go poking around in the dirt again.
The next day, he came home from school and she had bought him a plastic tank with a blue lid of pink pebbles and a fake plant.
And 3 living fish.
And 3 living fish.
He heard her on the phone to Nan saying she did it so TJ wouldn't keep going to play with the dead one.
But it wasn't that TJ wanted to play with dead fish. He just really wanted to know what was happening to him.
He just really wanted to know what was happening to him.
He tried to be excited about the living fish for her sake.
But really they weren't that interesting.
They just swam around in the water and
he got bored of them.
He got bored of them.
But he told her thank you lots of times and sat and watched them.
He even fed them their food.
But really she wasn't suspicious of him.
But all he really could think about was dead fish.
And his adventures under the ground.
He got his chance to find out the next day when Mum said she'd had a hard day and was going to have a bath and didn't want to hear anything from TJ for at least 20 minutes.
Just sit quietly and watch a cartoon, okay, buddy? That's all I'm asking. TJ did sit quietly in front of the TV up until the second the bathroom door closed.
He took off his shoes and socks so that he could make his way to the back door as quietly as possible.
And slowly opened the screen door.
It was the noisiest door TJ had ever heard.
He didn't remember it being this noisy.
Every time he went to open it, the tiniest bit, the door would eek and squeak until finally it was opened wide enough for him to squeeze through. TJ squatted carefully at the grave so as to not get dirt on his track pants and dug away at the ground with a wide stick so that he wouldn't get his hands dirty too.
The smell was bad.
And the kitchen paper that was soggy and almost completely brown
had little holes and tears all over it.
He flicked it up carefully with the end of the stick.
Whoa.
TJ whispered to himself.
Dead fish looked as bad, if not worse, than he smelt.
His scales were almost completely white.
And kind of furry looking in parts.
There were little grey armoured bugs crawling around him, and his eye was...
TJ flipped Dead Fish over with a stick.
Both his eyes were missing.
One of the bugs was squirming around in the hole where Dead Fish's eye had been.
They ate his eyes,
he whispered in awe.
Gross.
All the while he was sitting there, he had kept looking back at the house and at the bathroom window. Suddenly, as he glanced towards the house again, there was a flicker of movement at the bathroom window, and his heart went from in his chest, up his neck, and into his mouth in a millisecond.
He stayed frozen, expecting a loud yell of, TJ!
But nothing came. Seconds passed.
Seconds passed.
And then the light in the bathroom turned on, and he heard the bathwater running out.
Quick!
Mum opened the bathroom door just as TJ was getting his other sock back on.
His feet were still a bit damp and dirty.
Put those in the wash, will you? She said. They're rotten. I don't want to find them down the side of the lounge again.
He couldn't believe he wasn't busted.
That was close.
It was another couple of days before he had another chance to go and check on Dead Fish.
Mum had ducked next door to see their neighbour Christine, and those two could talk for hours.
TJ sped around the back and dug quickly to the spot where Dead Fish was buried, but he couldn't find him.
He dug a little deeper in case maybe Dead Fish had sunk into the ground or something.
But he still wasn't there.
TJ looked around to double check that this was the right spot. No, definitely the right spot, the right tree, the right rock with R.I.P. Dead Fish written on it. But no dead fish.
TJ slumped down on the ground next to the hole, thinking.
Maybe the bugs ate all of him.
They already had eaten both of his eyeballs.
Maybe he disappeared.
Maybe he disappeared like in the movies.
It might just take longer in real life.
Maybe he turned into dirt. The kitchen paper too, he wondered. Or maybe Mum had seen him the other day. Maybe she did know that he had tried to see dead fish again.
Maybe
Maybe
she
had dug him up and had buried him some other place TJ couldn't find him.
TJ looked around the garden.
He looked around the garden for signs of burial sites. But there were no obvious spots where the dirt looked disturbed.
And then he thought,
Or maybe she flushed him down the toilet like she wanted to do all along.
TJ's eyes went fuzzy and started to sting.
He blinked.
He blinked, and a salty tear ran down his cheek.
Dead fish was gone.
really, totally gone. And he would never know where he was again.
Or what happened to him.
He knew he couldn't ask Mum about it. She would know he had gone looking.
And he promised her he wouldn't.
TJ had known dead fish for 1 day while he was alive.
But he had known him for a week when he was dead.
TJ wiped his eyes and pushed the dirt back into the empty hole.
And pushed the dirt back into the empty hole.
Dead fish was a good pet.
He would always remember him.
Shout out to Caden, me, Ruben,
Ozzy,
Jaden,
Zane, Logan, Ruby, Zoe, Jesse, Keenan, TJ,
Eleanor, Curtis, Jay, Morris and Nadi, who feature in that story.
So you might have noticed that TJ was the main character in that story and also the name of one of the narrators.
The real TJ started the idea of this story off when he was 7. Our crew mentors arranged with TJ and his mum to do some filming with him for our feature film Protection.
And when they arrived, TJ said he couldn't do it today because he was going to buy a fish with his mum. The crew just said, "Oh, can we tag along?" And they filmed him buying a fish.
The rest of the story is made up, and it was influenced by a bunch of different people, including someone who features in our next story, Jenny Briscoe.
Jenny was part of one of our story steering groups. We got to chat with her for this podcast series, and here she is, explaining a bit more about where that idea came from.
Children are naturally curious, actually, and that story came from my daughter, who buried a bird and kept digging it up, and in the end I had to move the bird so she'd stop doing it. She was like, "Oh, it's gone." I'm like, "Yeah, it's gone." I just got fed up with her bringing the dead bird back into the house. But you know, there was nothing terrible about it. It was just that she wanted to know. And, you know, I've got a grandson now. He wants to know too. He just wants to talk about death all the time. And I think if we're not afraid, then it's a natural curiosity that happens. What we're projecting onto kids often is our own fear. And they're just curious because they want to understand what is dead. You know?
And it's okay to be curious as an adult.
Yeah.
It's okay to think about it and talk about it and the practicalities of it as well.
Yeah.
To know that information is actually quite useful.
Yes.
Story 2. Minutes away from not being afraid.
Jenny Briscoe is a community development worker in Port Kembla, one of the disadvantaged places where we live. A few years ago, she helped create Tender Funerals, a non-for-profit funeral service. When Steve Parsons left his radio DJ gig, he became a funeral celebrant. We were lucky enough to be able to talk to both Jenny and Steve about death and what they've learnt. Also in this conversation were me. Hi, I'm Lily. Phil, one of our crew mentors, and Amy, who was also from Tender Funerals.
I think one of the things that I've learned about death and dying is that it's a perfectly natural part of life. And most of us don't think about it. You know, we go through our life and if we do think about it, we tend to put it to the back of our mind. But doing what I do, I have to deal with it every day. So I think about it all the time.
I got cranky, really, about the fact that my mother's funeral cost so much money, because my mother's funeral cost nearly $10,000 and we already owned the burial plot. So I then thought, I wonder how people in the community I work in, which is a disadvantaged community, can afford a funeral. And of course, because we don't talk about it, we didn't know. I suggested at this community meeting that we had, I think we should form a not-for-profit funeral service. And everybody just went, yes, like that straight away. Yes.
So the community at Port Kembla created Tender Funerals. One of the ways that made it more affordable was by letting people know all the things they might be able to do themselves, drawing on the support of their family and community. There's actually a lot. You can look after the body of the person you love at home if you want, for longer than you might think. You can be involved in the washing and the dressing of the person you love as well. You can make the funeral be the way you want it to be, in the place you choose.
We outsource a lot of things these days, and I think we've outsourced death. We let the funeral directors and everybody else take care of that. And in a lot of cultures, even today still, the body is kept at home. People naturally grieve at home.
That time between when somebody dies and the disposal of that person's body is a time that we have stopped in our culture being involved in, and yet a lot happens in that time. A lot can happen.
In Victorian times, I guess because the death rate was much higher, you had a lot of diseases that we've done away with these days, but people died younger. Death was everywhere in those times, and it was very much a part of life. But because I think we live longer these days, we don't see it as much, and we put it to the back of our minds. And I think my grandparents, great-grandparents, they dealt with it a lot more. And in some ways, I think they dealt with it better.
What people don't realise that they could do is being able to see the body or spend time with the body or wash and dress them. And so when we first present that idea to many of us, that's the first time we've ever even heard of that being a thing. And because our default response is that that's not necessarily something we've had in our experience before, we go, oh no, our family don't do that. Like, I've never seen a dead person before, let alone my family member. And so we have that recoil that happens, which is just, that's our comfort zone. That's what we know as our norm. But what the really great thing about having that conversation with those families is then they know that they can do it. And so often what happens is they'll go home and they'll keep thinking about it, being like, how bizarre, the fact that you can wash and dress the person. And, you know, what would that even be like, washing and dressing my mother? And then they think about it and then they go, oh, actually, maybe it would be all right. But look, I've never done anything like that before and I really feel quite unsure. I'll just call the funeral director and ask a few more questions. And they ask a few more questions and we're able to explain to them, you know, what that is like. And a lot of those families end up changing their mind on their decision in not doing it to doing it.
What are we missing out on by not?
Yeah.
Being able to do more, like more of the looking after ourselves. Like, it's not exactly, doesn't require a degree to do it, does it?
No, it doesn't. It's like the simplest thing in the world. You know, look, really, truthfully, I do think it's part of being looking after our own, caring for our own people in that way is part of just being grown up as a society. That we are all understanding that we're all going to die and that being connected to that life cycle is actually part of being human.
One of the lines that I use at funerals is Albert Einstein said, all our lives will become the withered brown leaves on the great tree of life, and the withered brown leaves are going to fall to the ground. It's going to happen, and there's nothing we can do about it. Our lives all exist between our birth and our death, so it's a very natural thing.
The thing about death is it just truthfully does catapult you to the centre of life because you really understand that life is precious and that it's not endless. What happens is it wakes you up. So why wouldn't you want that opportunity to wake up?
There's a little saying I used to have when I was working in management. I had it on my desk and I use it all the time at funerals and I try and live by it now. It says, yesterday is history, tomorrow's a mystery, today's a gift.
You know, the thing that we say to people when they're about to go into the mortuary, you might say, you know, how are you feeling? And they might say, you know, oh, well, I feel afraid. And all I say to them, you're about 5 minutes away from not being afraid.
Special thanks to Steve and Jenny.
We talked about a lot more stuff with them, so you'll get to hear more from both Steve and Jenny in other episodes of Parting.
Actually, let's just jump straight back into the conversation with Steve for a quick second, because it's a good introduction to our final story in this episode.
It's interesting to see younger people working in the funeral industry. So the old image of the funeral director with the black hat and the crepe and the horses, and there's a lot of young females now working as funeral directors.
Really?
Yeah, girls in their 20s and 30s, and they're very good. I think they have a great deal of empathy, and you certainly need that.
We actually got to talk to one of those young female funeral directors. Amy is a funeral director at Tender Funerals, and when we sat down to chat to her, we agreed that we could all be curious about death and ask whatever questions we could. Story 3. Meet the funeral director.
I never met a funeral director, or I've never met anyone outside of a funeral home, on the outside. You go around the street or something, you get people wearing their work clothes and all that sort of stuff. You never really see people wearing the stuff from funeral homes. That one Coles worker I see all the time. You never see that one funeral home dude walking around.
That's funny, as I said that Phil was trying to find me before, and I was like, I'm not dressed like a funeral director wearing black walking up the street.
This is Jesse with Harry, Zane and Phil from our crew and Amy from Tender Funerals. So Amy, how do you get to be a funeral director?
Well, to be a funeral director, it's just on-the-job learning, actually. There's not much training for that. But if you want to go on to be an embalmer, that's where you have a lot more training. And then if you want to be able to do the next stage again, which is the preserving of the human body, that's a certificate for which I studied through mortuary school.
Yeah, it's just an interesting career path. It's not one that actually a lot of people talk about, is it? Going, oh yeah, I'm gonna be a funeral director, I'm gonna be a mortician or whatever.
Well, when I started, I actually was in high school. I was 16 when I started, which is very young. And I went to my high school careers advisor and said, I want to be a mortician. How can you help me? Our Australian culture we're sort of like the ones in the world that don't have much culture. That sort of means that our culture is a bit death-denying in the sense that it's uncomfortable to talk about it and it doesn't come up very much. And when it does come up, most people's experience would be similar to someone died. In a week's time, we're all going to go to a funeral for half an hour and then we're going to eat sandwiches and we're probably not really going to talk about it much after that.
Yeah. When my parents died, it was not like we knew that there were any other options other than ringing the funeral directors and getting them to take over.
I think people often... they sort of panic, right? If you had a body in your house, you'd panic. That's what you do. And so when we speak to them, our conversation really looks like saying, here's what you have to do, which is to contact the doctor. And then here's what you don't have to do. And so people know that they can just slow down and take each step as they feel like taking it rather than having to feel like it's a process they have to move through quickly and as far as making decisions for the funeral and those sorts of things. And, it's quite a scary thing if you've never experienced that before. And I know that certainly my first experience seeing a body was very much, I was so prepared for the fact that it might be traumatic that I forgot to consider that it could be ordinary. And so when I went into that experience, I was so wow, it's like the world's biggest anticlimax because I've just so prepared myself. And then it was oh, that was it. It's just a person.
What's the process from them passing then to being buried or cremated or whatever they feel?
I suppose talk about where the person died. So there's sort of 3 scenarios for that. And that could be that the person died in a hospital. And in those cases, most hospitals have facilities with a morgue and they would be able to hold the deceased until the funeral director came to collect them and bring them into their care. Scenario number 2 would be if someone died in a nursing home or at home in an expected death. And in that case, they would call the funeral director and the doctor would issue some paperwork, and that would then allow the funeral director to come and bring the deceased into their care, into their own mortuary with refrigeration. And then the other scenario would be an unexpected suspicious or accidental death, and that's where we would look at the coroners being the ones to bring the person into their care, into the coronial system, so that they can determine the cause and date of death, and then the funeral director would get the body from there.
Right, so when whales die, they're they all their gases stay inside them and they can explode. Does that happen with a person?
Look, it could happen with a person, absolutely. It's far less common to happen with a person. So decomposition starts in 2 places in our body. One of those places is in our gut, which is our intestines. And as we live and breathe right now, we have thousands and millions of little bacteria that are doing their job in our gut. But after we've passed away, their job changes. And so instead of digesting food, their job is now to work through the decomposition process. When we're talking about those whales exploding, what's happening in their gut is a really mammoth-size intestine having those changes happen in their guts. So there's a lot more space for all of that gas to build up, and then eventually, when that gets released, it can be a bit of a boom. With adults, human adults, that process happens a bit more slowly. And that's just because we have smaller intestines, we have less space for all those bacteria to be in there. So I think it's a pretty safe bet that a whale would have more bugs living in them than what we would. So they really don't have much prevention in slowing down decomposition, whereas we have enormous amounts of prevention, including things like embalming and those sorts of processes as well.
You know how like the fish markets and all that, they're like cutting up the fish. Like before, sometimes they even go to cut up the fish, it starts like twitching or something. I was going to ask if you've ever like experienced anything like that.
I've never experienced that, and I've never even really thought much about if that happens in humans or not. You've actually got me.
Yeah. Because you see it like on all like these hunting shows and all that.
I think the closest experience that I would have to that is what they call the death rattle, and that is that, you know, our lungs are full of air, and then in the process sometimes of rolling someone for the first time after they've passed away, say if you're placing them onto a stretcher, that air can be pushed out of the lungs in that process, and there can be a sound that gets made as an exhale or similar to an exhale.
So, what's it like working with people who have died, like looking after their dead bodies?
It feels like incredibly sacred work to work with the dead, and it's incredibly humbling to be the person to be doing it. There's sort of this idea that could be scary or unusual or out of the norm, but actually it's completely ordinary. It's just like doing many other things. It feels very much like you're looking after someone who can't look after themselves anymore. And I really love my job because I have people who come into my care who have often spent a great deal of time unwell or in a hospital, and through that process of doing a sacred washing, which is just using warm water and a little bit of soap and then dressing them back into their own clothing, you sort of see people return back into themselves in a way. Because if you think about our identity, you know, your favourite hat is what makes you you, and the way I wear my hair is what makes me me. And so those little things sort of become who we are in a way. And so when someone has those things returned to them, it's really quite profound and quite, you know, great, but also has nothing to do with me.
So what is happening when the body goes stiff?
What else have you been wondering about? Look at the way you're shaking your head. So what we're talking about is rigor mortis. And so rigor mortis is where all of the chemical reactions that happen in the body after someone's died is sort of making those changes, which is actually the depletion of the oxygen that's stored in our blood and our muscles as we breathe. And as that changes, then all of those muscles become rigid in the position that they're in when the person passes away. That happens at different paces for everyone, depending on the different conditions that they're in after they've died. The most unknown fact is that rigor mortis is temporary. So there's your crash course in rigor mortis 101.
Yeah.
You mentioned embalming before and other things that would slow down decomposition. Can you explain more about that?
I suppose if you look at the very beginning of why we do things to prevent decomposition, there's sort of two fields of thought there, and one of those would be chemical preservation, which is embalming and how that started, and then the other school of thought would be why we refrigerate. So embalming really started in the battlefields during the war, and that was because soldiers were dying there and they were outdoors and they wanted to send the bodies home, so they needed the bodies to last long enough to get back to their families to have funerals. But that's really where it all started. And of course, you've got the ancient Egyptian mummies, which was another type of preservation as well. But when we're talking about refrigeration being the main way of slowing down decomposition, that really just comes down to people having more opportunity to spend time with their person after they've died. They can even take them home for a period of time on a cool plate, which is like a refrigerated tray. So sometimes someone might be really ill for a long period of time and receive palliative care at home, and the person who's been caring for them have had them there for so long that they feel that they would like to be able to continue that care after they've died. So using the cool plate, they can be at home for up to 5 days. I want to know, have any of you guys experienced a death before in your worlds?
I seen my uncle and I was touching him and it was very soft.
Yeah.
Like a balloon, like you could just poke him all the way down.
Yeah. And that's not what you were expecting by the sounds of it?
No, I thought I could feel his bones.
Wow.
If you don't mind me asking, how long from after he died did you see him and touch him? Straight away, or was it like days later?
No, it was like when they dressed him. It was like, say, the day before the funeral.
When you see someone who's passed away, and especially someone that you know, and you lay your hands on their body, it's like a communication happens. And that communication is that allows your body to catch up with what your mind already knows. So in your mind, it's like you know the person's died, but it's not until you poke their arm or you touch their leg and your body can be like, oh, that's dead. That's what dead is. Would you agree with that? Was that similar to your experience?
Yeah.
And what's your nationality?
Aboriginal.
I love the Aboriginal practice. You guys get it so right.
My uncle's mum passed away, and like I didn't see like her in person or anything, but I seen photos. You see the photo from like when she's just passed, like even then her face was like sunken in.
It's like there's something missing, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Jesse? Have you had any experiences with death?
No, not yet.
Yeah, it's not a race.
That's a good thing.
That's a good thing. I've been 3 times in a room when someone has just died. And even though the lead up to those deaths was really hard, really shocking with one of them, when it came to the actual last breath, there was actually nothing scary about it. It was it was normal. It was peaceful, actually.
Yeah, I've never been in the room the moment that someone's taken their last breath, and that I find that so fascinating, that moment, and I suspect it would be probably similar to my last experience, one of those things that I would really work up in my mind, and then you're in it and you go, oh, that's all this is. That's all this experience is.
Yeah, it's just the last breath.
Shout out to Harry, Zane and Jesse who feature in that story, and a huge thanks to Amy. If you enjoyed listening to our podcast, you can support us to keep making more stories by going to Beyond Empathy's website and donating.
You can make a one-off donation or commit to supporting us regularly.
Every bit helps a lot. It's an easy site to find, www.be.org.au. That's B for Beyond, E for Empathy, so be.org.au. And even if you can't support us with money, you can really help us by spreading the word. Tell your friends, colleagues and families to listen. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Like our posts and share them. You know what to do.
And if you want to have a conversation with the young people who've created Parting, we're also telling a bunch of our stories in what we're calling podformances. Podformances can be live, virtual, or both. You can even host one. You could ask us to come and present at your school or for your team meeting, your conference, your event. Our young stars can appear live or virtually, or both, tell a few stories, and have a yarn about grief, death, and dying, and whatever else comes up. Just get in contact via our website. The people who made today's podcast are Caden, Nikki, Ruben, Zane, Phil, Rowena, Daniel, Simon, Zane, Jaden, Shanice, Lily, Harry, Ozzy, Logan, Zoe, Ruby, Jesse, Emma, Keenan, TJ, Alice, Sharif, Brianna, Eleanor, Gemma, Jay, Curtis, Elias, Morris and Nardi. The music you heard in the stories is from Philip Okerstrom, Damien Mason and also Kevin MacLeod. A special shout out to Zurich Australia and the Z Zurich Foundation. Beyond Empathy received funding from Zurich to create this podcast project, and their staff around Australia, and indeed from around the world, have heard the beginning of our dead fish story multiple times over the past 2 years as we've presented it to them in various podformances. We hope you all finally enjoyed hearing how the story ended. And thank you so much for your support, which has gone way beyond the money. Zurich have helped us pivot quickly when the COVID pandemic hit. They have helped us to restructure our company. They have assisted us with an overall risk management strategy and even helped us to learn how to do spreadsheets. All in all, they have provided incredible mentoring. Zurich truly shows the way when it comes to thoughtful and engaged support for community organisations like us. Beyond Empathy has also received funding for the podcasts from the Edge from the Australia Council for the Arts, Create New South Wales, Coordinaire, South Eastern New South Wales Public Health Network through the Australian Government Public Health Network Program, the Australian Government Department of Social Services under the Families and Communities Program through Barnardo's Australia, and also the Tony Foundation. We would love to hear from you. Send us a message about our podcast or make a comment. Tell us a story. You can send us a message via our social media pages or via the website, whichever is better for you. You've been listening to Parting, one of Beyond Empathy's podcasts from the Edge. Next time on Parting, we will have a story about keeping the window open so you can hear the sound of the ocean. Catch you then.